The distress beacon had been transmitting for 73 cycles. Ambassador Queleth of the Visari people stood in the communication hub, her 4 arms trembling as she watched the holographic display. Each blinking red icon represented a species that had received their plea for help. Each gray icon represented those who had declined. Every single icon was gray. The Zentari have officially refused, her communications officer reported, his voice barely above a whisper. They cite the excessive risk to their personnel and the statistical improbability of successful evacuation. Keleth's primary arms clutched the edge of the console. The Zentari had been their oldest allies, trading partners for over 3 centuries, and now, when the Visari needed them most, they turned away. "What about the coalition?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. They've classified our situation as a localized catastrophic event and have allocated emergency relief funds. The officer's mandibles clicked in what could only be described as bitter amusement. 5,000 credits. 5,000 credits. To save a species of 8 million souls whose planet was tearing itself apart. The Visari homeworld of Vesar Prime had been struck by what the scientists called a cascading tectonic failure. It started with one earthquake. A bad one, yes, but survivable. Then another, and another. The planet's crust, it seemed, had reached some critical instability point. Within 2 weeks, every major fault line on the planet had activated. Cities crumbled. Oceans turned toxic from underwater volcanic eruptions. The atmosphere itself was beginning to change as vast quantities of gas vented from the planet's tortured interior. The Visari had 3 months, maybe 4, before their world became completely uninhabitable. Keleth had spent the last month begging. She had called in every favor, appealed to every treaty, every historic alliance, every cultural connection the Visari had cultivated over their 700 years as a spacefaring species. The results were always the same: sympathy, well wishes, and closed doors. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Visari had ships, but not enough. They could move perhaps 500,000 people with their current fleet. The cost to evacuate the rest would be astronomical. Hundreds of ships, millions of tons in supplies. The logistics of moving and housing 8 million refugees until they could find a new world to terraform. No one wanted to bear that cost. Not for the Visari, a minor species with little political influence and fewer resources to offer in return. "Ambassador," her officer said quietly, "there's one more response coming through." Keleth looked up, not daring to hope. "Who?" "It's marked as coming from Sol system. Species classification, human." "Human?" Queleth's neural implant quickly accessed the database. "I don't know that species. Are they even part of the coalition?" "Provisional members," it says. "Their application is still being processed. They only made first contact 7 standard years ago." He paused, reading. "Oh. What?" "Their homeworld is classified as a Class 12 death world." Queleth felt her heart sink. Class 12? She'd never even heard of a rating that high. Most coalition species came from Class 1 or 2 worlds, gentle places with stable climates and few natural threats. Her own Vesar Prime had been a Class 3, notable only for its slightly higher gravity and occasional electrical storms. A species from a Class 12 death world reaching out to them was either a cruel joke or a prelude to something worse. "What does the message say?" she asked. The officer was silent for a moment, his eyes moving across the translated text. When he spoke, his voice was uncertain. "They say, They say they're coming. They have ships en route already. Arrival in 15 cycles. What? That's impossible. They only received our beacon 4 cycles ago. They couldn't have mobilized that quickly, and they certainly couldn't. She stopped, staring at the display. How many ships did they say they were sending? They didn't specify numbers. They just said they're coming with sufficient evacuation capacity, and that we should begin organizing our people for transport. He scrolled through the message. They've attached some kind of organizational framework, protocols for emergency evacuation, medical requirements, dietary information requests. It's actually very thorough. This doesn't make sense, Quelith said. Why would an unknown species, one not even formally part of the coalition, respond when our oldest allies have abandoned us? Perhaps they don't understand the scope of what they're offering, her officer suggested. A newer spacefaring species might not grasp the logistics involved. Or perhaps it's a salvage operation, another voice added. Quelith turned to see Coordinator Vesh approaching, his scarred carapace marking him as one of the survivors from the coastal cities. They arrive after we've died, claim our ships and technology as abandoned property. In 15 cycles, we'll still be very much alive, Quelith pointed out. Then perhaps they're coming to extract a price, Vesh countered. Deathworld species are known for their aggression. They could be planning to take us as slaves, leverage our desperation. Quelith studied the message again. The protocols were detailed, professional even. There were requests for medical information, presumably to ensure they could care for Visari physiological needs. There were questions about cultural practices, dietary restrictions, social structures. There were even questions about Visari art and historical artifacts, asking for priorities on preservation. It didn't read like a message from slavers or scavengers. We don't have many options, Quelith said finally. Prepare a response. Tell them we accept their offer and will begin organizing according to their framework. And get our xenobiologists started on a briefing about these humans. I want to know what we're dealing with. 15 cycles later, Quelith stood in the observation dome of Vesar Prime's primary orbital station and wondered if her eyes were malfunctioning. The humans had said they were bringing sufficient evacuation capacity. Quelith had imagined perhaps 20 ships, maybe 30 if this species was being genuinely charitable. That would still leave them far short of what was needed, but it would be more than anyone else had offered. What emerged from the shimmer of FTL transition was not 20 ships. It was not 30 ships. Quelith counted 147 vessels before she stopped counting. Ambassador, her officer's voice was awed. We're being hailed by the flagship. They're requesting permission to establish orbital coordination. Granted, Quelith managed. Put them through. The holo display activated, and for the first time, Quelith saw a human. The being that appeared was bipedal, which was common enough. 2 arms, which was surprisingly few. The face was flat, with forward-facing eyes that suggested a predator species. That tracked with the Deathworld classification. The skin was dark, smooth, and the head was crowned with short, tightly curled hair that had gone gray at the temples. When the human smiled, Quelith saw blunt teeth except for slightly pronounced canines. Omnivore, her mind catalogued automatically. Predator ancestry, but adaptable. Ambassador Quelith, the human said, the translator rendering his words in clear Vesari. I'm Admiral Marcus Cole, United Earth Defense Force. We're here to get your people out. Admiral, Quelith responded, still processing the fleet she'd seen. Your message said sufficient capacity, but I don't think I properly understood. How many ships have you brought? 187, Cole replied. We've got heavy transport ships, medical vessels, supply ships, and escort craft. We can move about 8.3 million individuals if we pack them in tight. It'll be uncomfortable, but we didn't think you'd mind under the circumstances." 8.3 million, Quelith repeated. That's nearly our entire population." "That's the idea." Cole leaned forward slightly. "We've been reviewing the data from your beacon. Your scientists estimate you've got between 12 and 16 weeks before atmospheric degradation reaches critical levels. We're planning to have your people out in 6. 6 weeks? Vesh had joined Quelith in the observation dome. Impossible, the logistics alone. Are complicated, yes, Cole agreed. That's why we brought specialists. We're transmitting a detailed operational plan now. We'll need your cooperation in organizing the population, prioritizing the sick, the elderly, and the young for early transport. But Admiral, I want to be clear about something." Quelith straightened. "Here it comes," she thought. "The price." "We're not going to be able to save everything," Cole said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. "We'll do our best to take cultural artifacts, data archives, anything that can be digitized or easily transported. But infrastructure, buildings, the physical history of your world, a lot of that is going to be lost. I'm sorry." Quelith felt something loosen in her chest. "Admiral, every other species in the Coalition told us we weren't worth saving at all. If all we lose are buildings, I will count us blessed beyond measure." Cole's expression shifted to something hard. "They what?" "The Coalition species. The Gentari, the Pravathi, the Kelson Accord. All of them refused our requests for aid. We are a minor species, Admiral. We have little to offer in return for the enormous cost of evacuating our entire population. They made the practical choice." "The practical choice," Cole repeated, his voice flat. "Right. Well, Ambassador, humanity has a saying, 'Leave no one behind.' It's not always practical, but it's who we are." The first transport wave began 30 hours later. Quelith watched from the orbital station as human shuttles descended through Visar Prime's increasingly turbulent atmosphere. The planet was shaking itself to pieces. From orbit, she could see new volcanic plumes erupting even as she watched, massive storms forming from the heat and ash. The shuttles flew through it all. "They're insane," Vesh muttered beside her. "Those atmospheric conditions would ground any sensible pilot." But the human pilots weren't grounding. They were flying in patterns that seemed to anticipate the turbulence, diving through gaps in the ash clouds, threading between storm systems that were tearing across the landscape. It was like watching a choreographed dance performed at the edge of disaster. The first shuttle docked with the station, and Quelith went to greet the passengers personally. The Visari who emerged were from Coastal City 7, one of the hardest-hit areas. They looked haunted, traumatized, their belongings clutched in whatever bags or containers they'd been able to salvage. A young Visari child, barely into her second molt, was crying in her parents' arms. A human was walking beside them. A female, Quelith thought, based on the body structure, wearing a uniform marked with a red cross symbol. "You're safe now," the human was saying, her voice gentle. "We're going to take you somewhere safe. Can you tell me if anyone in your family needs medical attention?" The parent, still dazed, shook their head. The human medic, because that's what she had to be, made a note on a datapad and then did something unexpected. She reached into a bag at her side and pulled out a small, soft object. It was shaped like an animal, brown and fuzzy, with large black eyes. "This is for you," she said to the crying child, offering the toy. "On Earth, that's my planet, we have animals called bears. This is a toy bear. He's very brave, and he's traveled all the way from Earth to meet you. Will you take care of him?" The young Visari, tears still wet on her face, slowly reached out and took the toy. She clutched it to her chest, and slowly her crying quieted. "What's your name?" the medic asked the child. "Piri," the parent answered when the child didn't respond. "Piri, that's a beautiful name," the medic smiled. "I'm Sarah. If Piri or anyone in your family needs anything, you just ask any human you see, okay? We're here to help." Keleth watched this interaction with growing bewilderment. This wasn't the behavior of reluctant rescuers or beings driven by cold practicality. This was compassion. This was care. Over the next few days, she saw it again and again. She saw human engineers working alongside Vasari technicians, not just organizing the evacuation, but teaching them how the human systems worked so they could help coordinate. She saw human doctors treating Vasari patients with equipment hastily modified for their physiology, staying awake for 30-hour shifts to handle the continuous flow of refugees. She saw human pilots making run after run into increasingly dangerous atmospheric conditions, pulling people out of crumbling cities even as the ground literally shook apart beneath them. She saw human cargo specialists carefully, reverently handling Vasari artifacts and cultural treasures, scanning and cataloging everything, treating each item as if it were precious. And she saw Admiral Cole running the entire operation from the flagship, barely sleeping, coordinating hundreds of moving parts with the precision of a master strategist and the dedication of someone who considered every single Vasari life his personal responsibility. 3 weeks into the evacuation, Queleth was reviewing transport manifests when alarms blared across the station. "What is it?" she demanded, rushing to the command center. "Seismic event on the southern continent," the sensor operator reported. "Magnitude 9.8 and still climbing. The entire tectonic plate is... oh no, oh no." On the display, Queleth saw Southern City 3, population 200,000, directly in the path of what could only be described as a tectonic tsunami. The ground itself was rippling like water, and the city was being torn apart. "We have transports on the ground there," Queleth said. "How many people are still waiting for evacuation?" 37,000 in that city alone. But Ambassador, the transports can't fly in those conditions. The ground instability is creating massive atmospheric disruption. It would be suicide. Keleth felt cold. 37,000 people. After everything, after all this hope, 37,000 were going to die because... "All wings, this is Cole." The Admiral's voice cut across the command channel, hard and commanding. "I'm seeing the situation at Southern City Free. All available transport craft converge on those coordinates. Fighter escort, you're going to fly atmospheric shield for them. Use your bodies to block debris if you have to." "Admiral," another voice responded. "Sir, the flight conditions are beyond critical. We'd be risking..." "I'm aware of the risk, Commander. I'm also aware that there are 37,000 people down there who are out of time. We didn't come here to save most of the Vasari. We came to save all of them. Now get your people moving." There was a brief pause, then, "Yes, sir. All wings, you heard the Admiral. Let's go get our people." Keleth watched in horror and awe as human ships dove into what could only be described as hell. The southern continent was tearing itself apart, massive fissures opening in the ground, volcanoes erupting, the atmosphere churning with ash and fire. The human transports flew into it anyway. Fighter craft, sleek, fast vessels that seemed almost alive in how they moved, flew in formation around the larger transports, using their own shields to protect the more vulnerable craft. When debris threatened a transport, the fighters would intercept it, taking hits that made Queleth wince. On the ground, human soldiers were organizing the panicked Visari, moving them onto the transports with calm efficiency, even as the world literally ended around them. One image stuck with Quelith, a human soldier, standing at the transport ramp, counting each Visari that boarded, and only stepping onto the craft himself when there was literally no one else left, even as the ground beneath him cracked and began to collapse. The last transport lifted off with the soldier hanging from the loading ramp, pulling himself inside as the craft gained altitude. Every single Visari in Southern City 3 was evacuated, 37,000 souls saved from certain death. Why did you come? Why did you risk your people yesterday? Why are you doing any of this? Quelith leaned forward. Admiral, I've reviewed your species file. You only achieved faster-than-light travel 12 years ago. You only made contact with the Coalition 7 years ago. You're still being evaluated for full membership. You have your own problems. I've read about your political divisions, your environmental challenges, the costs of expanding into space. Yet you brought nearly 200 ships and thousands of your people to save a species you've never even met. Why? Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Do you know what the Coalition representatives said when they came to Earth for first contact, Ambassador? They were horrified. Not by our technology or our governments or anything like that. They were horrified by Earth itself. He called up a holographic display, showing a rotating image of his homeworld. Quelith had to admit it was beautiful. Swirls of white clouds over blue oceans and green-brown continents. Class 12 Deathworld, Cole continued. Extreme temperature variations, violent weather patterns, tectonic activity, thousands of predator species, toxic plants, venomous animals, diseases that can wipe out millions. The Coalition team couldn't believe that sentient life had evolved there, let alone thrived. They spent 3 days documenting all the ways Earth tries to kill us. He zoomed in on different regions as he spoke, showing massive storms, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods. They asked us how we survived, and we told them we survived together. When earthquakes hit, we dig people out of the rubble. When floods come, we fill sandbags and evacuate the vulnerable. When diseases spread, we quarantine and treat and search for cures. When one part of our world suffers, others send aid. Not because it's profitable or strategic, but because they're people and they need help, and we're capable of giving it. Cole looked directly at Quelith. The Coalition representatives told us that was unusual. That most species, once they achieve stability and safety, prefer to maintain it. That risking resources to help others is seen as inefficient. They suggested that humanity would need to outgrow these impulses if we wanted to join the broader galactic community. And instead, you came here, Quelith said. Instead, we came here, Cole agreed. Because when we heard your beacon, when we saw that 8 million people were going to die and everyone had turned their backs, we had a choice. We could be practical and save our resources, or we could be human. He stood, walking to the viewport that showed Vesar Prime below, the planet now visibly dying, huge swaths of its surface glowing red from volcanic activity. Yesterday, we lost 17 people, Cole said quietly. 17 volunteers who knew the risks and went anyway, because they believed that every life matters. That's not efficiency, Ambassador. That's not practical. But it's who we are. We're the species that evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived by refusing to leave each other behind. We're not going to start now. Quelith felt moisture gathering in her eyes, tears, a physiological response she shared with humans, apparently. Your people died for ours, she said softly. The Vasari owe humanity a debt that can never be repaid. You don't owe us anything, Cole said firmly. That's not why we're here. But if you want to honor those 17 people, I'll tell you how. Survive, thrive, build a new world, preserve your culture, raise your children, and remember. Remember that when everything seemed darkest, you didn't give up. And maybe someday, when you're stable and safe and comfortable, and you hear a distress beacon from someone else in need, you'll remember what it felt like when everyone abandoned you. And you'll remember what it felt like when someone came anyway. The evacuation was completed in 5 weeks and 4 days. 8,217,409 Vasari were loaded onto human ships. Along with them went 300,000 tons of cultural artifacts, complete digital archives of Vasari history and knowledge, genetic samples from every species native to Vasar Prime, seeds, artwork, musical instruments, religious texts, and countless personal items that meant little to anyone but their owners. Keleth was on the last transport to leave. She stood at the viewport as the shuttle lifted off, watching her homeworld recede. From orbit, the destruction was total. The planet that had birthed her species, that had cradled Vasari civilization for thousands of years, was gone. In its place was a hellscape of fire and ash, a world that would be uninhabitable for millennia. But her people lived, all of them. Ambassador, it was Sarah, the medic she'd seen on that first day. Admiral Cole asked me to give you this. She handed Queleth a datapad. On it was a star chart, with one system highlighted. What is this? Queleth asked. It's a system about 40 light-years from here. The second planet is in the habitable zone, Class 2 world. Gentle climate, stable tectonics, plenty of water and arable land. It's unclaimed. We surveyed it about 3 years ago, but didn't need it. The coordinates are yours, if you want them. A place to start over. Queleth stared at the chart. A whole world, just given to them. I don't understand your species, she said, finally. Sarah smiled. Most days, neither do we. But the Admiral likes to say that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our adaptability. It's that we decided, a long time ago, that us is a bigger category than just ourselves. Our family is us. Our community is us. Our species is us. And maybe, eventually, every sentient being in the galaxy is us. We're not there yet. We still fight among ourselves, still have prejudices and conflicts, but we're trying. She gestured to the viewport, where the human fleet was visible, every ship now loaded with Vasari refugees. You're us now, Ambassador. That's just how we see it, and we take care of us. The Vasari resettlement took 3 years. The planet, which the Vasari named New Vasar for lack of better imagination in those early, exhausted days, was indeed ideal. The humans didn't just provide transport, they provided construction equipment, agricultural supplies, temporary housing, medical facilities. They stayed for 8 months, helping the Vasari establish their initial settlements, teaching them techniques for rapid development, sharing technology freely. Admiral Cole remained for the entire 8 months, and Queleth worked alongside him daily. She learned about Earth, about humanity's own struggles and triumphs. She learned about their wars and their peace movements, their environmental disasters and their conservation efforts, their prejudices and their civil rights movements. She learned that humans were not perfect. They were messy, contradictory, sometimes violent, often stubborn. But they were also capable of tremendous compassion, fierce loyalty, and a peculiar brand of optimistic determination that refused to accept that anything was impossible. On the day the last human ship prepared to depart, Queleth stood with Cole at the edge of the first Vasari city on New Vasar. It was small, prefabricated, nothing like the grand architecture of Vasar Prime,
But it was alive with activity, with children playing in the streets, with markets opening, with the sounds of a culture refusing to die.
"We'll never forget this," Quelith said. "What humanity did for us." "Remember it," Cole agreed, "and pass it forward. The galaxy is a big place, Ambassador. A lot can go wrong. A lot of people might need help. The coalition species, they've grown comfortable. They've forgotten what it's like to struggle, to need aid desperately. But you'll remember. The Visari will remember." "And what of humanity?" Quelith asked. "Your provisional membership with the coalition, did saving us help your application?" Cole's expression turned wry. "Actually, it seems to have made things worse. The coalition leadership is concerned that we're dangerously altruistic, and that our Deathworld psychology makes us too willing to take unreasonable risks. They've extended our probationary period another 10 years. Kelith felt anger flash through her. "That's absurd! You saved 8 million lives!" "We also violated several protocols about resource expenditure and risk assessment," Cole said. "And we've apparently made some of the established species uncomfortable. The Gentari filed a formal complaint claiming our actions made them look bad by comparison." "The Zentari," Quelith said, her voice cold, "can rot in the dark between stars." Cole laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "I'll be sure to include that in my next diplomatic report. But, Ambassador, don't worry about humanity. We didn't do this for coalition approval. We did it because it was right, and we'll keep doing it, approved or not." He extended his hand, a human gesture of respect and farewell that Quelith had learned. She gripped it with her primary right hand. "The stars are dimmer places without humans in them," she said. "I hope your species never changes." "We'll change," Cole said. "We'll grow, evolve, hopefully get better at some things. But leave people behind? Give up because something's hard? Let entire species die because helping them isn't profitable?" He shook his head. "That's not a change we'll ever make. That's not evolution. That's losing what makes us human." 20 years later, Ambassador Quelith, now Ambassador Quelith of the Visari Confederation, representing a thriving population of 9 million spread across 3 worlds, stood in the coalition chambers. The chamber was in chaos. The Kelson Accord, a mid-sized species of about 12 million individuals, had sent a distress call. Their twin homeworlds were caught in the gravitational stress of a passing rogue planet. Evacuation was needed, urgently, for at least 6 million people. The coalition was debating cost analysis, resource allocation, strategic value. The familiar, sickening calculus. Kelith listened for 20 minutes before she stood. "Honored members," she said, her voice cutting through the debate. "I hear a lot of discussion about costs and logistics. I hear very little discussion about the fact that 6 million sentient beings are going to die if we do nothing." Ambassador Quelith, the Gentari representative, said, his tone patronizing. "We all sympathize with the Kelson situation, but the practical realities." "The Visari Confederation is committing 50 ships to the Kelson evacuation," Quelith interrupted. "Heavy transports, medical vessels, and supply craft. We will also be contributing emergency housing materials and food supplies sufficient for 1 million individuals for 6 months." The chamber went silent. "Ambassador," the coalition coordinator said carefully, "the Visari Confederation, while growing, is still a relatively minor power. Committing resources on this scale could jeopardize your own stability." "Yes," Quelith agreed. "It's not practical. It's not efficient. It might even be considered reckless." She looked around the chamber. meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. 20 years ago, my entire species was dying. We begged for help from this chamber. Every one of you found reasons to refuse. Practical reasons, logical reasons. You made the efficient choice. She pulled up a holographic display showing the human fleet arriving at Vasar Prime. These beings didn't make the efficient choice. They made the right choice. Humanity taught the Vasari that civilization is not measured by its prosperity in times of peace, but by its compassion in times of crisis. That the true test of a society is not how it treats its valued allies, but how it responds to strangers in desperate need. Keleth looked directly at the Zentari representative. You abandoned us. The humans, a species you called too primitive and dangerously altruistic, saved us. They lost 17 people, ensuring that not a single Vasari was left behind. And when they departed, they asked for nothing except that we remember, that we pass it forward. She turned back to the wider chamber. So yes, we are committing resources we can barely afford. Yes, it is impractical. And yes, we will do it anyway, because that is what civilized beings do. The Vasari will not allow the Kelson to suffer the abandonment we suffered. We will not become so comfortable, so safe, so concerned with efficiency that we forget that every single life has value. She gathered her materials, preparing to leave. The Vasari ships depart for Kelson space in 2 cycles. Any species that wishes to join us in actually helping instead of debating is welcome to coordinate with our fleet command. Keleth walked out of the chamber to stunned silence. By the time she returned to her ship, she had received 7 messages from Coalition species committing ships and resources to the Kelson evacuation. It wasn't enough for the full operation yet, but it was a start. The 8th message was from Admiral Cole, now Admiral of the Fleet and humanity's primary coalition representative, despite humanity still being on provisional status. Ambassador Queleth, his message read, I hear you made quite the speech. I'm proud to say that humanity is committing 90 ships to the Kelson evacuation, not because we seek advantage or gratitude, but because it's right. And because an old friend taught me that the Vasari will always stand for what's right. It's an honor to stand with you. P.S. The coalition leadership is upset with both of us now. They're calling us a disruptive element in galactic stability. I think we should get matching t-shirts. Queleth felt her mandibles curve in what humans would call a smile. The galaxy was changing. Slowly, grudgingly, but changing. Because humanity had refused to accept that practicality mattered more than compassion. Because the Vasari had learned that lesson and were teaching it to others. In the end, every species had abandoned the Vasari. Every species but the Deathworlders. And the Deathworlders hadn't just saved them. They'd taught them what it truly meant to be civilized. Keleth opened a response to Admiral Cole. Matching t-shirts sound perfect. What's a t-shirt? The work continued. The work would always continue. But now, the Vasari, and slowly others, were doing it alongside humanity. Leave no one behind. Not practical, not efficient, but absolutely right. And in the darkness of space, on a dozen worlds, that made all the difference.